There was once a man named Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Patton who flew as an F-15 fighter pilot in Desert Storm. And on the first night of the war, his mission was to escort a large formation of bombers into the mountains of northern Iraq on a bombing run of a chemical weapons plant in northern Iraq. Now, the date for Desert Storm was chosen because of the absence of moonlight and the high clouds that helped the attacking Allied fighters from being detected by the enemy defenses. Flying in total darkness, they were completely reliant on their instruments. And so shortly after crossing into Iraq, Colonel Patton's jet was locked on by an Iraqi surface-to-air missile radar, and he violently maneuvered the craft to break the radars locked on him. Now, it worked, but it caused a second problem. Those radical movements in the dark threw off the balance of his inner ear, which is what happens when you get dizzy, right? And so causing him to become disoriented. His mind was telling him that the plane was actually going up at a rightward angle, but when he checked his instruments, they indicated he was actually in a 60-degree dive towards the ground. Now, he was sure that he was in a climb instead of a dive, and his mind was screaming at him to lower the nose of the plane. While his mind commanded him to correct the plane in one direction, the instruments instructed him to do the opposite. And in the pitch black, his life depended on making the right choice. Even though it took everything within him to overcome what his mind was telling him, he decided to trust his instruments. He rolled the wings of the plane level, and he pulled the F-15 upward, drawing more than 7 times the force of gravity on his shoulders, pulling the aircraft out of its dive. If he had lowered the nose of the jet like his mind had told him, he would have crashed the plane. By trusting his instruments, he saved his life. The first thing he did was check his altimeter. I think it's how you say it, altimeter, the thing that tells you how high up he is. And thank you, the FAA. Yeah, altimeter to see how high he was. And he found that he had narrowly escaped colliding to the mountains of Iraq by 2,000 feet. Very close. Although he had made the correct decision by trusting his instruments, if he had delayed just another couple of seconds, he would have crashed right into the mountains. Even the right decision can be a wrong one if it is made too late. In life, God will guide the instruments of our hearts through the Holy Spirit, and even though our minds may be telling us to do just the opposite. Proverbs tells us, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. Now today is week 3 of our sermon series called Old Testament Stories of Trust. Now I don't know about you, but I've been having a lot of fun with these Old Testament stories. First, we looked at the story of Noah, and we saw that he was not a great carpenter or a well-known boat builder, but he was willing and he was who God wanted. God, even if we are not the best, God is. And then we looked at the story of Rahab, and we saw that God doesn't make mistakes. He redeems our mistakes. And now today we're talking about the story of Caleb. Now this story is not real well known. A lot of people, if you say, hey, it's the story of Caleb, people don't know who you're talking about. I probably would have had to look it up too. It's not a very well-known Bible story. But last week, we talked about Rahab, who lived in Jericho, and Joshua, the leader of the Israelites, was investigating the Promised Land. You might remember he sent in those spies who hung out with Rahab. And for our story today, we have to back up a little bit. We got to go back about 40 years. You might remember when Joshua and the Israelites were looking at the Promised Land, when they were spying out Jericho, they had just finished wandering in the desert for 40 years. Now, when you hear that, it kind of begs the question, why were they wandering for 40 years? I mean, it kind of conjures up this image of like a big giant group of people just aimlessly going around in the desert for 40 years. That's a long time to be lost. Did they never think to grab a map? You know, it's not like Moses was like refusing to pull the van over for 40 years. You know, I'm not getting directions. I mean, I know men are stubborn, but 40 years is a long time to be lost. But what we're going to find is that it is no accident that the people of Israel wandered in the desert for 40 years. Their wandering in the desert is actually a punishment for what happens in this story, for the story of Caleb. Not all who wander are lost. They knew exactly where they wanted to go. They just weren't allowed to go there because of this story. And so our story begins 40 years before Rahab. and Joshua. Moses is leading the Israelites, and he sends out some scouts to check out the promised land. And the promised land is amazing. And the scouts, they come back, and they're so excited. They say, this land is incredible. Verse 26, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation and all the people of the Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation, and they showed them the fruit of the land. I mean, they're so excited, they brought samples. They brought fruit. They're like, look, here's the fruit of the land. Now, I don't get that excited about fruit. But to them, it showed them that the land was good for planting. It's good for growing things. This is a place we can live. But the report doesn't stop there. Verse 28, it says, however, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified, and they're very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Now, this is like the bad part of the report. There's lots of good things about the land. It's an awesome place, but fortified cities, powerful enemies. Now, the descendants of Anak, they're called the Nephilim, and I had to do some research because I didn't understand why it was such a big deal. But it turns out the Nephilim, the people that inhabit the land, they have a reputation. First, they're supposed to be huge. The Nephilim are like giants, like Jack and the Beanstalk style giants. I mean, they're huge people. In fact, in the legend of the Nephilim, which comes from Genesis chapter 6, it says that the sons of God, which we don't know what that means, maybe it was angels, had children with the women of the world. And that's where the Nephilim come from. And so there's this old legend that they're not just big. These guys are supposed to be descendant from fallen angels. Like, that's the bad guys that they're dealing with here. That's pretty intense, to be descended from a fallen angel. Now, I don't know about all that, right? The Bible doesn't actually tell us if that's a true story, but the important thing is that the people of Israel believed it. The people of Israel believed that these guys, these huge monstrosity of guys, were descended from fallen angels. That's the reputation of the enemies that's waiting for them in the promised land. So now we introduce our main character, Caleb. Now, Caleb is one of the scouts, and he believes that God is with them, and he says, let's do this. Verse 30, he's all ready. And Caleb quieted the people before Moses, and he said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. But then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So you see it, right? You got Caleb who's saying, we can do this, we've got this. And then you've got these other scouts who are saying, no, we don't know if we can do this. Can we overcome these obstacles? Is God truly with us? And the people are terrified. Moses tries to explain. He says, God is with us. Nothing can stop us. But they're so scared. They're overwhelmed by what's in front of them. And so they start to talk about, hey, maybe we need to kill Moses and pick ourselves a new leader, someone who will take us back to Egypt. And then that moment is when God shows up in chapter 14. And it says, then all the congregation said to stone them with stones. But the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the people of Israel. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people despise me? How long will they not believe in me in spite of all the things that I have done among them? So this is God's response. He's frustrated with Israel. He's angry with Israel because they're not paying attention. And so what comes out of that is the punishment that they have to wander in the desert until an entire generation dies. They have to wander in the desert until the next generation takes over. Then they can go into the promised land. God is frustrated with the Israelites. And I get it. I mean, God is always there for them. God is so reliable, and yet Israel refuses to trust him. It's this frustrated love. God keeps offering his love. He keeps providing for the people, and they keep ignoring it. They keep acting as if God is not reliable. So let's bring this into the here and now. In our lives, how many times has God gotten us through the trials that we have dealt with day after day? And then we get to this place. And every time a new trial comes up, how often do we ignore it? How often do we doubt God, even though he's gotten us through everything this far? Right before this story, these Israelites have experienced some of the most incredible things in history, right? These people who are standing on the edge of the promised land, these are the people he pulled out of Egypt, right? At the beginning of their story, Moses shows up in Egypt and frees them from slavery. These are the people who witnessed the 10 plagues of Egypt, right? And all these incredible acts of God, and then they get out of Egypt, and they get up to the Red Sea, and they hit the Red Sea, and they panic. Oh, no, what are we going to do? God, help us. We're doomed. God will never help us. And then Moses parts the Red Sea. These are the people who witnessed the parting of the Red Sea. I don't know about you, but if I watched God part the Red Sea, I would have no problems with my faith for the rest of my life, for the next 10 lifetimes, right? He watched the parting of the Red Sea. They walked across on dry land. They get to the desert, and what's the first thing they do? Start whining. They start complaining. Oh, man, there's no food in the desert. There's no water in the desert. What are we going to do? God, we don't believe you. Why didn't you trust us? Or why didn't you just leave us in Egypt? Why would you bring us here? And so then God provides manna. If you don't know, manna is like this type of bread. We don't really know what it was, but it was like this bread from heaven. And every morning they would wake up and miraculous bread would be right in front of them. And at one point Moses gets so frustrated with the people of Israel, he takes his staff and he smashes it up against a rock, and water starts pouring out of the rock. God provided food and water out of nothing for these people. And then a little bit more time goes by. What do they start doing? Complaining. Whining, God, we don't believe in you anymore. We don't trust you anymore. You're not going to take care of us. All we've got to eat is bread. We're sick and tired of manna. I'm trying to get on that keto diet, and there's too much carbs. There's too much bread. I need some meat. God, we're so frustrated. Give us some meat. So God provides miraculous meat. A flock of quails flies over their camp and dies all around them. There's just dead birds coming out of the sky. It says, this is in chapter 11 of Numbers, it says, then a wind from the Lord sprang up, and it brought quail from the sea. You know, quail are like a type of bird, right? Quail from the sea, and it let them fall beside the camp, about a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on the other side, around the camp, about 2 cubits above the ground. And the people rose all that day, and all night, and all the next day, and gathered the quail. So you got dead birds, a day's journey, 3 feet deep in every direction. God provided them meat out of nothing. First parting the sea, then bread out of nothing, then water out of nothing, then bread. And I'm on the same page as our scripture lesson, right? Like our scripture's over here, free birds are over here, right? Like this is right before, and yet still they doubt. And so now they're standing in front of the promised land. They're standing on the edge, and they're looking at the giants, and they're thinking, no, the God who parted the Red Seas, the God who brought the 10 plagues on Egypt, the God who brought bread and water out of nothing, the God who gave us free meat. Nah, he probably can't deal with what's next. He probably can't deal with the next struggle that we're dealing with. God is always there for them. God is so reliable. God tells them, you can beat these giants who live in the promised land. When God is with you, nothing is impossible. So let's bring this into our lives. God is reliable. God is always there for you. And God says that the giants that you are facing in your life, you can overcome this. With God, nothing is impossible. Now I got to be careful here. All right, because I have to point out something very important. God is not Santa Claus, right? We know this, right? God is not Santa Claus. God is always there for Israel, but he challenges Israel. He didn't just hand them stuff. God is always there for us, but he challenges us. He pushes us to take that next step, and he backs us up every step of the way, but we are the ones who have to take that step. Right? God does not open up the heavens and solve all our problems for us. When I say that God is there for you, I'm not saying he's going to just like take all your troubles away like that. What I mean is that God created you just as you are. And he put you in the situation you are in on purpose. And you can do this. That God will be with you every step. God has given you potential. And he has high expectations for you to meet that potential. It's the difference between giving somebody $20 for grocery and giving them a job interview so that they can pay for their own groceries for the rest of their life. It's the difference between giving a man a fish and teaching a man to fish. You've heard that phrase, right? Give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, and you'll never see him on Sunday again. Is that the old phrase, right? God is always there for you. He will catch you when you fall. He will help you get back on your feet, but sometimes you will fall. We will still experience failure in life. I don't want it to make it sound like God's this like vending machine in the sky. He's so much more than that. We still have to take the steps for ourselves. Sometimes God takes the training wheels off because he believes in you. God has a plan for your life. So maybe it's time we start believing in ourselves too. The greatest obstacle between God's support and your goals is fear. Put simply, fear causes us to do stupid things. After Caleb and the scouts report to Israel, we get to chapter 14. And the people are starting to panic. They're starting to freak out. We can't go in there. We can't go into the promised land. In chapter 14, verse 2. It says, "Then all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said, 'Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness. Why is God bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?' And they said to one another, 'Let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt.'" They want to go back to Egypt. If you don't remember the history, they were slaves in Egypt. That's the worst idea I've ever heard. Why would they want to go back to slavery? They cried out for hundreds of years about how horrible it was. Now they're thinking about going back to their masters because they are afraid of what's in front of them. Because fear causes us to do stupid things. Fear causes us to do stupid things. There's a fancy word for this. It's called defamation. Defamation is that thing where you slander a good thing to make it seem not as good, right? Like we've got a goal in our mind. We've got something that we want to get to, and then we start to see all the obstacles, and so we start to make up some stuff about that goal. I didn't really want it, right? It's not. It's that moment when you're shopping and you get really excited about something, right? Like you find some clothes or a new guitar amp or a gun or I don't know what people buy. And you get there and you're like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I wanted. I've always wanted. I'm so excited. And then you look at the price tag and you're like, it probably wouldn't fit anyways. You know, the color's no good, right? I didn't really want it. We convince ourselves. There's this like psychological process where we slander a good thing because we feel like we cannot overcome those obstacles. It's a mind trick we play on ourselves, and it happens all the time with fear because fear causes us to do stupid things. When we are afraid of the next step, we try to convince ourselves we never really wanted it. We never really cared. Israel is staring at the promised land. They know it's an amazing land. They know that. And now they're trying to convince themselves, it's not that good. They're going around spreading a false report. They say, oh no, the people who go into that land get eaten. They get devoured. So let me ask you the question. What do you want from this life? What is your promised land that you have convinced yourself that you didn't really want? You convinced yourself, I didn't really want. What could you accomplish in your life if fear wasn't holding you back? Fear makes us do stupid things. And so my challenge to you this week is to take a leap of faith. We still have to do the walking. We still have to take that leap, but God is behind us every step of the way. Look to your future and take a leap of faith. When we hear that the people of Israel want to go back to Egypt, it is so easy for us to judge them, to condemn them, be like, what fools! They want to go back to slavery? That's the dumbest thing ever. Why would they want to do that? That's the worst idea. But the truth is, it's the devil that they know. It might be terrible. It might be an awful situation, but it's familiar. And so it's safe. They understand it. They don't like it, but it is familiar. How many of us in our lives have held back from our future because we were afraid of the unknown? Think about abusive relationships. You ever hear those stories of the women who have been abused? Sometimes men, but most often it's women who have been abused. And you wonder, how could these women go back to those situations? How could they walk back into that life? But the truth is, it's easier. It's safer. It feels safer. It's less scary than the unknown future in front of you. Or on the other side, married couples who are fighting and that they're trying to work out their issues. It is so much easier just to bottle it up and walk away. Just get the divorce and walk away, never look back. But to open up your relationship, to stare at the strengths and the weaknesses, to work on it, admit your faults, and start the healing process, that's terrifying. That's hard work. to have the courage to assess a relationship and move forward, that's terrifying. In the church, how many programs, how many ministries, how many committees have we held on to? Not because they were necessary, but because we were afraid of letting them go, because they were familiar. One thing that I have found is very true in church is that churches do not fear change. Everybody always says, oh, church people don't like change. Church people don't like change. Oh, no. We're afraid of change. But it's not true. We're not afraid of change. We're afraid of loss. We don't mind change if we know it's going to be a good thing. We don't mind change as long as we know it's going to get better, that we won't lose anything. But to take that step when the future is unknown, when anything might happen, when we might lose something, when we might fail, that's what we are afraid of. That's what holds us back. We are overwhelmed by the fears and the what-ifs of the future. If I could have a moment of honesty. Well, let me start by saying this. 2019 was an incredible year for this church. We did amazing things in this church. We set goals, and we exceeded just about all of them. We did amazing things. And in January and early February, there's this thing that happens in the office of a church. We call it end-of-year reporting, where I have to go in and fill out all these forms about the numbers of how many people we have and how many people in Sunday school and how much money we give to different things. And I have to catalog the entire church. And then I fill it out on a program that's on the computer, right? And when I fill it out, it's kind of a quirky program. It red flags anything that looks weird. If a number goes really far off from the previous year or really far down, they flag it. And they say, are you sure? Are you sure that you really did that, or was that a typo? And I got a couple of flags this year when I was filling it out, and it looked at the program, and it said, you gave 425% more than you did in 2018 into community mission projects. Did you really give 425% more back into the community? And I looked. Yeah, we did. This church gave we gave $3,000-$4,000 last year. We gave almost $20,000 last year, poured back into our community. And I was so excited about that. And I'm looking at 2019 and all the things we did and all the victories and the way that God has been working in this community. And then we got to January 3rd, the day that the protocol was announced. And we let fear seep into this church. And so we don't know what's coming. We've got this uncertainty about the future of our church, and are we going to be in a new denomination? Are we going to stay? And we have these votes and all this scary stuff, and we don't know what's coming. And one of the biggest dreams that came out of 2019 was the capital campaign. Have you guys heard about this? We want to fix those steps out front. We want to renovate the whole front of this church, but it's a big project. It's scary, and it's unknown. And so in January, all the committees of this church, we had our finance committee, our trustee committee, our ad board, they were worried. And they were scared, and so they made decisions that kind of said, how about we hold off? How about we batten down the hatches, let the storm blow over, and see what happens? Right? Maybe, and the trustees kind of talked about this, and they said, maybe we should hold off on a year for that capital campaign. And if this was any other program, like some company out in the secular world, that's a good idea. That's good thinking. That's wise planning. That's good leadership. But ever since we had that vote, I have felt uneasy. Because it feels an awful lot like we're not trusting God. It feels an awful lot like we're saying, maybe we shouldn't step into the promised land. I don't think we can overcome those giants. And so I decided this last week, and I did not warn the trustees at all. But we're not going to worry about it before my baby comes. But when I get back from leave, we're going to revisit that conversation, and we're going to launch a capital campaign this fall. We're not going to wait. Those steps, we're going to do this. I hope I don't get in a lot of trouble for that. Those steps need to get fixed no matter what, right? We need to do this for our congregation, for our church. We need to take that leap of faith as a church. So now bring it into your personal life. Take a leap of faith. My challenge is to you today is to demonstrate your trust in God by taking a leap of faith. Now, I have one last thing I want to talk about. I'm not one of those TV evangelists who tells you to sell all your stuff and give me all the money and make bad decisions. I'm not promoting poor planning and rash decisions. There's a difference between ignoring the obstacles and just jumping, and seeing the obstacles and trusting and taking that leap anyways. There's a big difference there. I don't want you to ignore the obstacles in your life. I want you to see the obstacles that are in front of you, and I want you to trust that God will make it happen in your life, that God will enable you to make that leap, whatever it is in your life. You have a purpose in God's plan, even if you don't know it. And I love God's response to Israel's fear. It says in verse 11, he says, it's kind of like God is saying, look, how long? How many times do I have to prove this to you? Right? You didn't believe me when I parted the Red Sea. You didn't believe me when I provided food and water out of nothing. You didn't believe me when I gave you free quail. You didn't trust me all these. How many times do I have to provide? Do I have to be there before you trust in me? Now let me ask you, think about your life. How many struggles have you overcome to get here today? How many struggles did you overcome? How many times have you pulled through every obstacle to get here this morning? For me personally, I look at my past and I think, wow, if things hadn't worked out exactly the way they worked out, things would not have worked out at all. Every time a challenge comes up in our life, money's tight, got in a fight with the wife, kids are acting up, might lose my job, union strike at GM, don't have enough volunteers for this program. And we reach out, we react out of fear, and we hurt each other. When we are afraid, we hurt each other. We say defensive, mean things. We lose our temper. We get stressed out. And the whole time, God is up in heaven, watching, waiting, asking, when will you trust me? When will you believe that I have been with you every step and I'm not going to leave you now? How many times do I have to prove myself before you start believing in me? Make God your priority. Rely on him. Rise to God's challenge to fulfill your potential. Take that leap of faith. Israel had a big job in front of them. It wasn't going to be easy, but Caleb believed. We got a big job in front of us in this church, Flushing United Methodist Church in 2020. We are here to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, and it can be scary. When the giants of life confront us, we got some big stuff coming in 2020. But God is with us the whole time. What if I'm overwhelmed? You will be. I guarantee it. But with God, you don't have to be afraid. And so I'll leave you with this. May you make God your priority. May you rise to God's challenge of your potential. May you align yourself with God. Take that leap of faith. Amen.